It's such a great opportunity for me to be with you. My name's Derek, and I represent Boise Bible College, with whom this church has had a great relationship for so many decades. You have financially supported the church. You've prayerfully supported the church. You've sent kids to the college. You've been partnering with the college in multiple ways. And I'm just privileged, having never worshiped with you, to say thanks. Thanks for your partnership with us, and continue to pray for this next generation of leaders that are come through this church, and maybe they'll come through the halls of Boise Bible College. I'm privileged to know Caleb and Katie. They graduated the year that I arrived, so we missed each other for just about a month or two, and getting to know Scott and his family. Actually privileged, Your sister Kaylee was in, I think, like my rookie year class on teaching basic doctrines, and that she thinks I did all right by the grace of God. So great to make a connection with the whole Bryant family. It's a real privilege for me to be here. Let me just give you a quick update about the college. COVID, has done some numbers on our students and affected the school in some ways, like everything. But we've been doing in-person classes all last fall, and managing COVID as it comes on campus and having protocols in place. But we've been doing that. And so we're just completed our first week of classes this last week. I'm teaching a course right now it's the same course I taught when Kaylee was in there. So I got 10 years under my belt. So new batch of freshmen, 35 in that class. And so privileged to have you come by the campus sometime. And as the Lord prompts the college in your mind, would you just pray? Lord, continue to bless that school. And may the Lord bless this church. Where I want to go this morning with the message, I'm privileged, Scott, for the opportunity to come. You get to hear it a second time, so thanks for your mercy on that. As talking about mercy, I wanted to stay in the book of Matthew. Just before I tell you where we're going to go specifically, the book of Matthew in a whole is like Matthew's gospel account presenting Jesus, and Jesus coming as the king. And if you get the idea of Jesus being the king in the book of Matthew, you quickly see that Matthew's version of this kingdom, of this king, is not like any other kingdom. It's actually upside down, an inverted kingdom. And Matthew presents Jesus to be that way, in a way that is a little different than our culture. In fact, in presenting the coronation of the king and all the regal authority, one of the big things that we're going to see in the book of Matthew is that self-deflation is the norm in the kingdom. That lowering yourself in such a way that you're not promoting yourself or not flaunting yourself, that's the kingdom norm. And to do otherwise doesn't bring fame to the Father. It doesn't bring any attention to the Father. In fact, my big thought for this message is anything that draws attention away from the Father dishonors him. Let me say that one more time. It's kind of at the heartbeat of the gospel, but where we're going to go right in this message. Anything that draws attention away from the Father actually disses on him. So we ought to bear that in mind in Matthew chapter 6. If you want to go there, I'll put the text up on the slide. In Matthew 6, he's kind of right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, that 3-chapter sermon, right on that lush, flowing hillside in the northern part of the Sea of Galilee in Israel. It's a beautiful spot. It's a lot like Oregon. You can grow anything there in the northern part. It's kind of the headquarters area for Jesus. And he has this huge crowd show up, and he's right in the middle of this message on this hillside, and he's really trying to woo them to follow him. I mean, he wants them to become followers. At the same time, though, while he's inviting them to consider what it means to be a follower, he's raising the bar on what it really means to understand the kingdom, I would say rather high, and unapologetically filtering out those who would rather be seen with this king rather than serve this king. And so out of the gate in his ministry early on, he has no problem saying, come follow me, here's the bar. Ready to jump? And in that, he's really trying to get at the idea of a collision with culture. And what we're going to hit on here is this idea that anything that gains your own popularity, that is counter to the expansion of the kingdom, and that is inappropriate in the kingdom. And the world actually celebrates this, so we're kind of up against it today, like they were at the Sea of Galilee. The world actually celebrates you and wants you to celebrate you. That's the story. And so we're wooed into the spotlight of me, you. We are. It's just how it is right now, and it's very challenging for us to think through that. But in Jesus' kingdom, the paradigm is antithetical to that, perpendicular to that. So in the way of Jesus, the spotlight can't be on you. It's only on him. So that's the issue here. Someone has said this: The journey toward greatness is one of stepping out of the spotlight, not into it. That's countercultural today. But even Christians, we're not immune. Once we become a Christian, we're not immune from wanting to be noticed and wanting to be recognized and wanting to be somewhat adored by those important people, especially when those important people talked about me to those other friends of important people that they have. We're kind of pulled into that culture, and resisting that temporary pleasure means doing good deeds in such a way that I'm anonymous in some way. That doing good deeds in such a way that it draws attention to nobody else but Jesus. That's the inverted kingdom that Jesus is trying to invite the folks into. And Matthew 6 actually offers a way to be great in the Father's eyes. It begins with Jesus kind of issuing this warning. Chapter 6, verse 1. Here's the warning. Beware of practicing your righteousness before people in order to be seen by them. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. The verse is kind of the overarching thesis statement for the next 16 verses. And in these 16 verses, Jesus is going to address to this crowd in the Sea of Galilee 3 pretty popular acts of holiness. One of them is right here we're going to talk about today is this: how do we give to the needy? What about praying? And what about fasting? Those were acts of what it means to be righteous. And Jesus is saying, beware not to do those holy acts in a way that draws attention to yourself. It's almost like he's saying, hey, you want to be on my team? You want to wear my jersey? Awesome. Seek to impress God, period. Seek to impress nobody on the earth. Seek to impress him with your holiness that brings no attention to yourself. And he's almost saying anything that draws attention away from God, that draws attention to you, isn't practicing good holiness. He's almost saying like, I'll show you. If you want to follow me, dear multitude at the Sea of Galilee, you want to follow me? I'll show you, I'll model for you what it is to draw attention to God alone. So who wants to sign up? I got a sign-up list over here. Who wants to join my team? That's sort of where he is. Well, one person who signed his team, not at the Sea of Galilee, but a few centuries later, was Dwight L. Moody. And Dwight L. Moody was one that committed his life to Christ in a big way. And it's hard, it would be hard to kind of overstate the status and the status of Dwight L. Moody in his heyday. He was the 19th century evangelist, many revivals that he preached, many conversions. The church on both sides of the Atlantic were blessed because of Dwight L. Moody. Moody's visibility and popularity were, I would say, on par with a lot of popular people today and celebrities today, but Moody constantly fought, and I would say actually fled from the trappings of stardom and unselfishly pursued the path of a servant. So here's one example. It's been told that Moody hosted this large contingent of European pastors in Massachusetts at this Bible conference that he was hosting. The pastors from Europe were housed in a dormitory, and according to European standards, they all placed their shoes outside their doors at night, expecting that a little servant boy would come through and collect the shoes and clean the shoes and shine the shoes. Except this was Massachusetts and not England. So no servant boys were going to appear. But Moody noticed the shoes. And rather than like shame them or chide them or embarrass them for their cultural ignorance or rebuke them in any way, Moody actually gathered the shoes and he collected them and shined them and put them out in front of the door. And then when they got the shoes in the morning, none the wiser, they had no idea who did that. And Moody didn't do it in a way to gain any attention. However, the story goes on. Servanthood is contagious. One of the pastors that was there saw Moody. Maybe he had, I don't know why he was out at night, but he caught Moody. It wasn't his motive, but he caught Moody trying to do something in secret. And that astonished pastor actually spread the word to the other pastors. And a conspiracy of anonymity actually was born at that conference. And the shoes were shined however they were shined for the rest of the conference. Moody knew Jesus' teaching. Hey, do holiness without drawing any attention to yourself, anonymously. And Moody lived that out. To do something for someone where no attention is drawn to yourself. In a nutshell, here's the collision. The worldly way of thinking kind of goes like this. Greatness is evidenced, or proof of greatness comes by your recognition from significant people. But the godly way of thinking, the upside down way of thinking is greatness is defined this way, that it's evidenced by your attitude toward insignificant people. Maybe just briefly consider that with your own job, your own company, your occupation. How you view your colleagues, how you view your bosses, how you view people, especially those people below you in the chain of command. And so Jesus continues in verse 2. Thus, when you give to the needy. When is an assumption. It's like, hey, you're signing up for my team. You want to be in my kingdom. Those insignificant people really, really matter. So when you give to those insignificant, needy people, sound no trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogue or in the streets, and that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, Jesus said. He's speaking to the crowd. Truly I say to you, they've received their reward. But when you give to the needy, there's that assumption statement again. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Let me unpack this just for a moment. Can we just do this just for 2 minutes? That phrase, give to the needy, in the Greek. Matthew, it was recorded in the Greek. The phrase give to the needy is poieo elemasune. And those two Greek words actually linguistically are associated with the English idea of do mercy. That's pretty much what those two Greek words mean. That phrase, be about doing mercy. In fact, the root word of elemasune shows up in the previous chapter when Jesus said, blessed are the merciful, same word. Here, merciful doesn't show up in our English Bibles. It's give to the needy. Let me support it a little bit further. The Old Testament's written in Hebrew, you know? And so in the Greek-speaking world, how did they get to know the Hebrew Old Testament? Well, it got translated into the Greek. The Septuagint translated the Hebrew into the Greek. Do you know that the Greek word elemasune, when it was deposited over a Hebrew word, two Hebrew words were equalized. The word for righteous and the word for loving kindness. When those Hebrew words showed up, the Greek word for mercy was the one used on behalf of those two Hebrew words. Do you get it? To do mercy means that's righteous. That's what it means to be right in the eyes of God. That is loving kindness. That's the loyal covenantal characteristic of God lived out, doing mercy. And that's what Jesus is getting at. So my question, as I was preparing for this sermon, is I looked at a half a dozen English versions, and mercy isn't the word there. How about your Bible? Your Bible probably says giving alms to the poor. And when you give to the poor or the needy, that's probably what your Bible says. So why doesn't it say do mercy? Well, here's why. In the 1st century BC, a few decades or so before Jesus shows up on this earth, some Jewish rabbis, they associated poieo elemasune, do mercy, with give alms to the poor. They associated that phrase, do mercy, to doing something like almsgiving, money, food, clothing, do something to the needy. And so the rabbis, get it, they morphed mercy with money. And something gets missed in our translations if you read give money. Actually, it's give mercy. You think of it in Acts 3, remember the guy at the temple gate? He was expecting people passing through to do their religious, righteous thing, expecting them to give money. And that's when Peter says, hey, silver and gold, I don't have. Remember that phrase? But what I do have, and he does mercy, not money. Hear that? So this idea of dispensing mercy by giving alms to the poor was a common expectation. It was a common standard of how am I being right before God? Giving alms, doing things by giving money. That was my way to see if my behavior with God was pleasing. So do mercy is this godly virtue of righteous living in action, sometimes with money, but maybe not. Maybe not. In Jesus' mind, we're to do loving kindness by giving mercy to anyone in need, because that draws attention to God. It spotlights God. It highlights God's characteristic, his loving kindness at the core. It makes the Father famous. Mercy can be done by giving money, clothing, but not necessarily. Be creative. What are some other ways we can do mercy? That's what Jesus is trying to invite that crowd to consider, and us as well. So my question here today is to pursue this idea just for a moment. Well, just who are the poor that he's talking about? Here they are in northern Israel, Sea of Galilee. Hey, give to the poor. Well, who would be the poor there? Well, anybody at the lower end of the structure in terms of wealth and birth in the social order of things. So just narrowing it to Matthew, here's a list that I compiled. Here's a list just looking at Matthew's gospel, who the needy might be: the agricultural worker or the reaper, the shepherd of sheep and goats, a guard at a prison, slaves, adults, slaves, children, the unemployed, the prostitute, as immoral as it might have been, a needy poor person, the bandit, of course, the widower divorced with no husband to provide for, orphans with no family to provide for, the sick, the leprous, the blind, those with palsy, any physical deformity that might prohibit them or inhibit them from being able to live in life. They were marginalized as less than in the first century world. And in case you're wondering where Jesus lands when speaking about helping poor, he always sides with them. Always. They have a place of honor in Jesus' upside-down kingdom. The last, actually, are the first in that kingdom. The least are the greatest. So in their, I guess my wondering is, what about the wealthy? Is there a place for wealthy people? Can wealthy people be a part of the kingdom? Sure, there's a place for everyone, but you'll see later in chapter 6, if you read later on, Jesus actually will address laying up treasures in heaven, not hoarding treasures on earth. The wealthy, we can tend to do that. And actually, wealth can cause a divided heart. He's going to address that later on with the crowd. To live in Jesus' kingdom with all the ample resources that a rich person might have means giving to the poor in such a way that doesn't draw any notoriety to oneself. Doing mercy without drawing any attention away from God. So just who the wealthy are. Who are the wealthy? Well, in the Sea of Galilee area, that northern part of Israel, the wealthy would be the people that they go to the ritual baths. They might go to the Cardo Maximus, that would be like the athletic area. They might go to the outdoor amphitheater because they could afford that. The rich and the wealthy in Jesus' world would be those that have a house large enough to actually hold like a small church in it. Or maybe they would have a slave or two managing their crops. The wealthy. What about today? Bring it to Idaho. The wealthy or the poor would be those that are destitute. The poor would be those that are needy. Those that are devoid or lacking the basics of life. The impoverished, poverty-stricken homeless person, maybe living on food stamps. In Boise area, we have refugees that come from around the world, war-torn nations, that refugee people come trying to resettle. Is that happening here in Twin? I don't know that. But those people are trying to resettle here. They're definitely on the poor, lower level. Veterans that might struggle because of issues with war and having a hard time fitting in society. Those who are previously incarcerated, having a hard time sliding back into society or hold a job or find anybody of accepting them in community. Or mentally or physically challenged people to have a job. Widows, eating meals alone, insecure, orphans. You can see this list of these folks are all around us if we open our eyes. The situation ought to break our heart. I want it to break my heart. And here's the deal. The rich are not pressured by that stuff. The rich don't have to survive daily. And so they're relieved of some things. I like the idea of rich being defined this way. Anybody that's rich has options. Ready? Did you have shoes you chose from today or just one pair? How about pants or shirts? Cereal options? Did you have any of those? How about a car? Do you have a vacation house? I mean, entertainment? You want to watch something? Do you want to watch it on your iPhone, your iPad, or your iMac? I mean, we have options, do we not? Every one of us do. To give mercy and to do mercy implies one with options, one with resources. The downside is you actually have a position of authority over people, a position of negotiation over people, even viewing needy as like that object to do something good for them and to be the giver, as privileged as it might be, actually puts us in a spot of danger of position and power. Abraham Lincoln put it this way: nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. To do mercy is an act of unclutching power and humility. he's inviting this crowd. Can you see some of the crowd beginning to walk away? This bar's way up here. I don't know if everybody likes this idea. I'm not sure we're always comfortable with this idea. But to serve the needy, those less important, less significant people with no recognition to me, that's what Jesus is trying to invite these folks to. To do kindness and do mercy for their benefit and for God's fame. You want to know what it looks like to live right in God's eyes? Do you want to please God in this paragraph? When you're merciful, verse 2. And by doing merciful acts, verse 3. So that your mercifulness might be done in secret, verse 4. 3 times he speaks about this conspiracy of mercy. My wife, I was processing this with her, and she said, now obviously, Derek, you can't do that completely, absolutely, without people noticing you. I mean, like, at least one person's going to watch and see you. Like the person you're helping is going to notice you. So how do we do this mercy without notice? Of course, every once in a while, someone might catch you, like Moody got caught. Really, it's at the heart. It's about what's my motive and what's my attitude, as though it was done in humble secrecy that nobody knew except for God. So don't sound a trumpet, he says. I don't think they sounded trumpets when they collected tithes or offerings. It's a bit of a hyperbolic statement here because the charity boxes in the temples and things were shaped like the opening of a trumpet or the opening of a brass instrument. And so you can kind of toss it as you walk by. And it might cling or make a noise. Careful doing that all might hear how many coins you drop in there. Can you hear that hyperbole like that? And those that do that 3 times, he says, have received their reward in full. 3 times. They've received their reward in full. Those attention getters that give mercy and they pray and they fast to get attention, they've already received their reward in full. That implies this idea that the temporary praise is satisfying to them, but it's not. It's not satisfying. Jesus emphasizes the future reward for those who will forego present temporary praise. And those who do righteous deeds in order to be observed by others, he has a pretty harsh word here. He describes them as hypocrites. Shows up 3 times. Another word that shows up 3 times in this section. Hypocrites, when he speaks of those who give alms to the poor or pray or fast, he says, don't do it like those hypocrites. 3 times he uses mercy and 3 times he uses hypocrites maybe to counter them by way of contrast. The word, you know the word, hypocrite means a play actor, like the guy or the gal in the outdoor theater. They're acting, they're pretending to do something that they're not. That's the idea of hypocrite. In the New Testament, hypocrite's always used in the negative, always. It's never be a hypocrite. It's never that. You'll never find that. It's always a negative thing. This idea of faking it and being insincere, or duplicitous, or inconsistent, kind of like public figures saying one thing and doing something different. Can you smell that in our culture today? He says this in chapter 5, I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. He's inviting them into the kingdom of heaven. But if you do it like they do it, those Pharisees, in chapter 23, 6 times Jesus calls the Pharisees, the religious elite, he calls them hypocrites, fakers, pretenders, not genuine. And if you choose to do mercy to the poor, if you choose to do mercy, that is a standing ovation to the Father. To standing O every time without any notoriety to me. It always throws the kudos to him. And it reflects Jesus' mercy. Genuine mercy like that is pretty extreme. It actually means that we would transfer some of our wealth and take on some of their poverty. That I would actually share some of my options and resources and actually take something that they have. That's the way Jesus did it. Paul said it in 2 Corinthians of Jesus, though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you by his poverty might become rich. That's not earthly monetary wealth. That's an eternal richness. And Jesus gave up luxuries. He let go of the comforts so that we would experience mercy. So that we would do mercy in secret, not on a stage. And that's a big tension point for our culture today. We are saturated today by a culture of public notoriety and public recognition. Do you know what I mean? We are saturated with this idea, this subtle paradigm shifting going on in our culture and in your world and your family, where seeds of discontent are sown if you are not seeking some recognition. It's hard to keep a private life with the cultural seeds being thrown at you, to keep them from taking root within you. I've got to post this cool quote or this picture. Look, I just helped a needy person. Selfie. I mean, do you see what I'm saying? It's all around us. Those tools are helpful, but we're being wired to think that social media actually is my definition of affirmation and my identity. And we just need to be aware of that. True righteousness, though, seeks to make God famous. How? Jesus said, do it secretly. A conspiracy of merciful anonymity always makes God famous. To do otherwise aligns with our self-absorbed, kind of narcissistic culture, seeking monetary applause. And in their commentary on Matthew, a couple of scholars said this about the Pharisees that I think I resonate with, and I don't like it. He said the Pharisees were not giving, they were buying. They wanted praise of men, and so they paid for it by giving money to the poor. Wow. Genuine mercy is done with a pure heart in secret, where only one sees in secret, and that's God. And here's the second tension. The deeds of righteousness performed by Christians will very likely be seen by other people. Jesus said this. These seem to be in conflict with each other. Back in Matthew 5, the followers of Jesus are said, let your light shine before men, before others, so that they may see your good works. Here in chapter 6, it's like he's saying, well, do it all in secret. So which is it, Jesus? Let your light shine so people will notice or not. But if you look on in chapter 5, verse 16, he goes on and says, so that, here's the reason why your light ought to shine for them, so that they will applaud the Father, not you. So he's not inconsistent. Only deeds done with the motivation for God's fame and God's notoriety, that matters. And then he adds this interesting analogy, this stark image. A person should be so secretive in giving mercy that the left hand should know what their right hand is doing. Now, this is hyperbole, okay? This is patently impossible. You understand that? It's impossible to let your left hand not know what your right hand's doing. It's impossible. So he's using such an impossible thing in a hyperbolic way to impress upon the hearer the need to be private in your giving. Let me illustrate it this way. Charles Spurgeon, another famous preacher, scholar, and his wife. Story is they would sell eggs that their chickens laid. They would sell eggs. They're Christians, so you'd think they'd be generous, right? Well, as generous as they were with other things, they refused to give any of their eggs away. In fact, if you're related to them and you need some eggs for, scramble some eggs for breakfast, they'd say, nope, you can buy some. You may think that the Spurgeons were actually pretty stingy. And they put up with that. Their character was assassinated when they were alive. Critics, and they did not defend themselves. Only after they died did you know the rest of the story. The reason they never gave any of their eggs away and they sold their eggs because the profits of the egg sales went to 2 widows that they privately, left hand, right hand, they privately supported and nobody knew it. And they told nobody. They got what Jesus was saying on do mercy, really secret, anonymously, unobtrusively. Not to build a legacy for yourself, but to do all you can to deflect attention away from me, but to the Father. To do mercy. It means that we're not lazy. Actually, to do something. There's no indifference allowed here. Someone said related to the poor, doing nothing is the undoing of ourself. So do mercy. Do something quietly, unobtrusively, no spotlight, like Jesus. He made you in secret, and he's actually working right now behind the scenes for each of us, and we don't always even recognize it. It's just who he is. Eugene Peterson put it this way, be especially careful when you're trying to do good, not to make a performance out of it. It might be good theater, but the God who made you won't be applauding. Let's bring it to home. About a year ago, COVID-19 came. You believe that? 12, 13 months ago. It affected businesses, your schools, and things were closing, people growing concerned and fearful. And I've been able to see churches, and maybe you've seen churches stepping up to meet the needs without any fanfare. Churches stepping up with genuine hearts to help distribute food, maybe making masks, partnering with local agencies to help the unemployed, help parents and all the strain of parenting that was created with kids at home and kids being home alone with no meals. Maybe caring for small businesses that were struggling. Maybe you've heard, as I've heard, of people actually, remember the stimulus check in the spring, actually giving their stimulus check to the church to distribute that because they didn't need that. Small groups of people identifying families in desperate need and doing something. May it be said of Christians that a conspiracy of merciful anonymity defined how they cared. May that be said of Christians. Are you in need physically? Mentally, spiritually, are you in need emotionally? This church exists to try to offer counsel, to offer some help in the times of need. Christians we really do need to have a pretty intense relationship with Jesus for that to happen. We really do need to be tied tight to Jesus because no one can really negotiate all those motives that we're being squeezed into without a love relationship, a dependently love relationship upon Jesus. There's no way we can maneuver through the temptations of this world's kingdom in order to make a difference in Jesus' kingdom. Consider this closing example of the early church, putting Jesus' teaching into practice, doing mercy sacrificially. Do you know in history, in the Roman Empire, there were two great epidemics that struck the empire. One was in the 165, 180 area, and one was in the 250s to mid-260s. Mortality rates were high in both cities and rural areas during these two epidemics. William McNeill, a historian, he estimated that 1/4 to 1/3 of the population perished during that first epidemic. And at the height of the that third century epidemic, just in Rome alone, 5,000 people died daily. These are severe times in the Roman Empire. Early in that second epidemic in North Africa near Carthage, healthy people fled in droves from the pandemic, leaving everything behind, even the church. One of the bishops, Cyprian, he drew all the Christians together in the city of Carthage, downtown, and he said this: if we are going to do what Jesus did, so that through his poverty we might become rich, I call you to give personal and financial aid and care and comfort to all that have need. That's countercultural today. It was back then. They lived empathetically and they did mercy well. In the second big epidemic in 260, Dionysius of Alexandria, this is still North Africa, Dionysius wrote in Easter this letter. In 260, he wrote this letter speaking about the substantial number of people in his church that this epidemic had taken their lives as they were caring for people. He said, most showed unbounded love and loyalty, never sparing themselves and thinking only of one another. Heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need and ministering to them in Christ. Many, in nursing and curing others, transferred their deaths upon themselves and died in their stead. Wow. Dionysius also described how the pagans responded. The heathen, the non-Christians, behaved in the very opposite way. At the first onset of the disease, they pushed the sufferers away and fled from their dearest, throwing them into the roads before they were dead, hoping thereby to avert the spread and contagion of the fatal disease. The Christians did not leave. They stayed. And they cared for the sick. They did mercy. Those two epidemics got retold in the next century. In the 4th century, those stories were retold about how the church in the 3rd and 2nd century helped the poor. Eusebius is a church historian. He was the bishop of Caesarea. He wrote this about those Christians in the previous century. He said, all day long, some of them, Christians, tended to the dying and to their burial, countless numbers with no one to care for them. Others gathered together from all parts of the city, a multitude of those withered from famine, and distributed bread to them, risking their lives. And Eusebius goes on to state that because of their compassionate mercy in that previous plague, the Christians' deeds were on everyone's lips and they glorified the God of the Christians. And then a few decades later, after Eusebius recorded that, the Roman Emperor Julian took notice. Julian actually was raised in a Christian setting. He knew the Christian faith. He was passionately determined to undermine the Christian faith and to stop the expansion of the church. Yet, in his efforts, he still could not ignore the Christian practice of mercy. He wrote this to his pagan priest. Julian wrote this: while the pagan priests neglect the poor, the hated Galileans devote themselves to the work of charity. It's disgraceful, he says, that the impious Galileans, those Christians, that they support not only their poor, but ours as well. All men see that our people lack aid from the impious Galileans. All people see they lack aid from us. And Julian actually proposed to the pagan priest, he said, I believe we ought to really and truly to practice one of these Christian virtues. The pagan emperor said that about the church. Do we know any of the names of those people? Nope. They're just a community doing a conspiracy of mercy. Names were lost, except for one, Christ. The early Christians did mercy. May it be said of us. From that seaside message and those that decided to follow with risk that Jesus, into the Roman Empire, and we hear the stories of Christians there risking their own life. Maybe said of us, as COVID still lingers around here, maybe said, Jesus people do mercy. Those are mercy people. Not my name, not your name, but Jesus' name, to the fame of the Father as heaven comes to earth through us. Let's pray about that, okay?